when you're ready.
Thanks, John. I'm going to call to order the June 10, 2021. I heard that. I'm going to call to order the June 10, 2021 meeting of the General Manager Oversight and Performance Management Committee, meeting remotely. I will call the roll. Vice Chair Sloan.
Here.
Director Cook.
Here.
Director Lewis. Director Catlin. Director Deschelle.
Here.
Chair Rivera Malpietti. Director Bouquet.
Present.
Okay, looks like we've got 5 members of the committee, so we do have a quorum. If anybody, John, if you notice anybody else come in, give me a heads up, would you? So my understanding is we've got the TransPro team here. My understanding is we're gonna go over a high level review of sorts of the outcome of the strategic planning session that occurred on June 5th, I think. And my apologies for not attending. I had an unavoidable conflict, and when the date was proposed, I knew I couldn't make it. So there you go. So I know there are a number of questions, comments that people want to make. I talked to 9 different directors after the session to get some input and feedback, and I know there's going to be some comments and questions. But Mark, if you guys want to do your presentation first, and maybe we'll hold the questions and comments till the end. Does anybody, any member of the committee, have any questions or comments before we start? I see Director Catlin has arrived. Thank you. Any other directors? No, that's it. Good. Okay, so Mark, if you want to go ahead with the presentation, we'll defer to you now.
Super. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for the committee's benefit, we probably have 15 or 20 minutes worth of content, so we'll put that in front of you all. And then happy to either just step back and let the directors dialogue, or happy to respond to questions or feedback that the committee may have. Amanda, if you might want to share slides, we can then begin to take the committee into one of the topics which you have engaged us for, and that is beginning to prepare your general manager and CEO's performance review process. So want to share with you a little bit in regards to theory, and then begin to jump into the actual structure for the committee's consideration. So 3 topics that we wanted to put in front of you this evening. The first is thinking about the general manager's CEO performance review process and the structure that would take. The second is beginning to share with you a preview of what that tool might look like that we use with different organizations nationally. And then the third would be the next steps in this process, obviously the most significant being this committee's input and feedback in regards to the best way to be able to advance. So what we're recommending for the committee's consideration is a performance review process that would commence the 1st of July and would run for 18 months through the end of the calendar year of 2022. And then we would begin to get, our recommendation would be to get you on an annual process tied to your year that would begin on January 1st of 2023. We're simply recommending an 18-month process to get ourselves tied to the year as we go forward. So this first year would be 18 months. You can see here that there are 3 elements that would go into the evaluation process for the general manager and the CEO. The first would be objective in nature. It would be based upon success outcomes and delivery of key performance indicators. Those would be fact-based answers where the general manager and CEO would prescribe to produce a certain level of objective results. The board and CEO would align around those results, and there'll be a fact-based answer. It either was achieved or was not, and all parties will give their feedback in regards to that, but there clearly is an answer as to whether it was delivered in a manner consistent with what was described at the beginning of the process. The second piece of feedback would be subjective in nature. It would be the spirit by which the general manager and the CEO produced those results. So that would be 50% of the performance review would be subjective, tied to a set of values of the organization. And the third would be the CEO and general manager providing reflective feedback on her performance, and the board providing reflective feedback to the CEO on her performance. So that would be more of a dialogue, more of a conversation, and I'll share with you some examples in a minute. Back to the split of 50-50, we're suggesting, as we think about building the structure of this performance review process, for this first period to split it equally, 50-50. There are some organizations that we work with that may put 60% to one side or 60% to another side based upon where they stand. Not uncommon for an organization that is significantly in trouble to think about 65% being performance-based objectively and 35% tied to the values. We're recommending to get the structure stood up to split those 50-50 at this point, but would welcome the committee's consideration and reflection around that topic. Next slide. So here, as we think about these three spaces, objective, subjective, and then feedback, here are some examples. So an objective outcomes-based result would be to increase the overall net promoter score. That's quantifiable. There's an answer to that. It either happened or it didn't. There's a way to, in a fact-based fashion, produce a result which all parties can say, that is the answer, and then we can provide feedback in regards to the result. The middle column is subjective in nature. It's possible that you would have a value around transparency in data. And so that could be a value of the organization. The CEO would provide her perspective as to how she embraces that value, and the board would subjectively provide their feedback in regards to the CEO's culture and the way that she engages in delivering that particular value. And you can see here, that's the spirit of engagement by which the CEO executes to be able to deliver those results. And then finally, the third column are much more general feedback and open-ended questions. I'm going to share with you some examples in a second, but it's really questions that you're inviting your general manager and your CEO to reflect on for the course of the coming year. Things that hopefully all parties come to with good faith, with an effort to help the CEO deliver even greater value to the community and to the organization. So objective on the left-hand side, subjective in the middle, and then reflective in regards to the right-hand side for all parties to think through how they can improve performance. So the first step in this process is the general manager's, CEO's self-evaluation. So the way this typically works in clients with which we engage is the left-hand column is that objective outcomes-based result. Most boards, just as you would in regards to having an independent financial audit, turn to a third party to verify the delivery of those outcomes. The board doesn't want to rely simply upon management's presentation of those outcomes. You really want a third party to be able to say, the net promoter score is X, or the financials are Y, or the employee net promoter score is Z. You want to be able to have confidence in the veracity of those outcomes. The middle column, the CEO provides her thoughts on values adherence, examples of where she may have been living those values, and examples of where she would like to do better as she thinks about going forward. It is subjective in nature, and so the CEO starts with sharing her thoughts as to how she worked during the course of the year to embrace those particular values or wants to subscribe to do better. And then finally, the third column, the general feedback and open-ended questions, the general manager reflects on those questions and gives the board a sense as to where her thinking is in regards to those particular topics. So the process begins with that third-party verification of results, and then the CEO going through that self-evaluative process, which is then shared with the board. The next step is where the board takes over. And so the board will receive the objective fact-based results, but then is invited to provide feedback in regards to those results. So the results are the results. There's not a debate over the facts. The net promoter score is X, the financials are Y, but the board is able to provide feedback. And I'll share some examples of some questions where the board provides feedback to the CEO in regards to those results. The middle column, subjective in nature, this is where the board weighs in a collective fashion in regards to the spirit by which the CEO was engaging in producing those results. I think I've used with this board the example of Enron previously, where they were producing the objective results, but they were lying. And so the spirit by which they do that is so critically important. And it's why we recommend that a third party actually verify those outcomes on the left-hand side. And then finally, in step 2, the board shares its collective feedback on those reflective questions that I was speaking of at the outset, questions for the CEO to think on in regards to how they may enhance their performance and provide greater value to community customers and employees. The next step is the formal evaluation process. This is where all of the various board responses, the feedback to the objective results, the feedback to the subjective values, and then the responses in regards to the feedback for the CEO's consideration is aggregated into a comprehensive report. Typically, there will be themes that emerge amongst the way the board will respond, and that is aggregated into a common voice, which is then presented by the board chair to the general manager and CEO. So the board's thinking is aggregated into one voice and then presented by the board chair to the general manager and CEO for a dialogue that takes place in regards to the themes that come back from the board in each of those 3 columns that I was describing. Finally, the last step is the criticality of actually establishing the outcomes for the next year. It's a cyclical process. And so typically as we complete the performance review for the past year, we are setting the outcomes for the future year. We want to agree as the quote unquote season begins, what the outcomes are that the board is looking for so that your CEO can think about a business plan, think about the budget that will be necessary to fund that work plan. Think about whether the KPIs need to be adjusted and reprioritized in a different way to produce the outcomes upon which the CEO will be evaluated. The outcomes that we're recommending at this point, and I would again suggest that we think more about the structure than the details, is a structure around 4 outcomes, which this committee has seen previously: 1 of community value, 1 of customer excellence, 1 of employee ownership, and 1 of financial success. I'm not going to repeat the right-hand side. You've seen it before, and the board had a debate in regards to the customer excellence column in regards to essentially a volume ridership discussion and a value, a quality discussion in regards to experience. Our recommendation for the CEO's performance review is that we really think about that from a quality perspective, because that's most under the CEO's control, the ability to enhance the quality of the experience. Clearly this past year, ridership plummeted. That would not be due to the CEO's experience by any stretch. She does have amongst her control to build the structure to be able to drive the quality of experience, whether there's a pandemic or not. So these would be the objective outcomes that we would think about for the CEO's performance review starting in July through December of next year. Three components to this. So as we think about the objective component in regards to quality, it could be to improve the Net Promoter Score by a certain percentage, which is what we're suggesting. The outputs, and this is where I want to spend a second so that the board can think on this in regards to the discussion that took place on Saturday of quality and volume. While we're recommending that the outcome by which the CEO would be evaluated is quality, the Net Promoter Score, we certainly are going to be measuring in regards to the metrics, the outputs of that process, ridership. Volume, of course, matters. And so that would be one of the key KPIs which the management team and the CEO would be reporting on a quarterly basis to the board, because it certainly matters. Other examples of those metrics would be on-time performance or operating cost per hour or customers per hour in regards to productivity. There are a number of KPIs that are critical to producing the outcome. The CEO is simply being measured by the outcome of a higher quality experience. And then finally, there's a number of inputs which actually drive the outputs. It's having a quality preventive maintenance program. It might be the purchase of greenhouse gas friendly vehicles. It could be professional development training for operators to improve their on-time performance. There's a number of inputs which drive the outputs to produce the ultimate outcome by which the CEO would be evaluated, which is customer satisfaction. Long way of suggesting, of course, volume matters, and it would show up here in the KPI structure. Let me take this thought just a little bit deeper and give you a sense of what a performance scorecard would look like to produce those outcomes. So you can see here, and in this example, there's probably 30 different KPIs. I'm not going to focus you on the details of it. We'll show that to you, as we go forward. The point being, ridership will show up here. There will be a goal that is associated with that, and it's prioritized. So you can see as we kind of double click into the customer excellence category of the performance dashboard, ridership will absolutely live there. The goal will be to increase it a certain level. There is a definition of that particular KPI. And you can see in the right-hand column, there's an information source. There's a piece of where the data would come from to be able to populate that particular component. So I want to be clear in this whole point. While we're suggesting that quality is the outcome which your CEO has most control, ridership is very much going to show up in the performance scorecard and will be one of the key factors that is reported to the board and prioritized, as you can see here, in this performance dashboard. That's the objective side of the house. The subjective side of the house is in regards to the spirit of engagement. And I'll do this quickly because many of the board members have seen this. The organization is suggesting that there would be 6 values that would show up in regards to the CEO's and her management team and all employees' performance and spirit by which they operate as employees of the organization: passion, respect, diversity, trustworthiness, collaboration, and ownership. Some of the board members may know that you provided us with some feedback in regards to this, and you'll note that the word customers shows up in several of these values based upon the feedback that you provided on Saturday to your CEO and certainly to us as the team supporting your CEO. So these are the subjective values which we're suggesting would be part of the CEO's performance review. The reflective questions, the questions by which the CEO would evaluate herself in providing thinking to the board as she goes through a self-reflective process, and then the questions by which the board would provide feedback to the CEO through this reflective process. Again, I'm not going to read them to you, but you can get a sense the greatest strengths that the general manager brings, the 3 areas which the CEO might develop their skills to bring greater value, questions that you might invite the CEO to reflect on for the course of the coming year? What are things that you would invite her to think on a little bit? Are there additional behaviors that she might introduce that would enhance her effectiveness to bring value? And how might she adjust her approach in regards to the community, customers, and workforce? What are adjustments that you might urge her to think on? These are those reflective questions which you would be providing for your CEO to reflect on in regards to the coming year. So let me take you into the structure of this. This would be a digital wizard. So it would begin, step one, as I suggested, would be the third party providing the actual objective facts in regards to the production of the outcomes. The CEO would go through the self-reflective process, and then the board would engage. The middle column you can see here is a screenshot of this digital example where there would be an objective answer in regards to the outcomes. And then the board would be invited, as would the CEO, to provide some feedback in regards to those objective results. The facts are the facts, but there still would be the opportunity for feedback there. The column to the right, you can see the screenshot, is in regards to providing feedback in regards to each of the subjective values, the way the board sees the CEO executing against the outcomes by which they are evaluating her. And then the third category of the evaluation, and the screenshot you can see here, is the more open-ended and reflective questions that I was sharing with you previously. So 3 components to this: objective, subjective, and feedback. And that's essentially would all be done, again, in a digital environment for the board to be able to aggregate into one common report, which the chair would then present and have a dialogue with the CEO, as I was suggesting. So the next step in this process is today inviting the GMOC to provide feedback to us that we might reflect on as we advance forward. Over the next several weeks would be to finalize both the content and the structure. And you'll recall I urged us at the outset to really think this first year about getting the structure set up. And then we begin to, as we go forward, to enhance on the content. The end of this month for the full board to consider the GMOC's recommendations and for the board to adopt the outcomes and process for the CEO's evaluation. And then by the end of the month for the chair to formally share with the general manager and the CEO the criteria by which she will be evaluated over the course of the next 18 months. Mr. Chairman, I promised 15 to 20. I think I hit the upper end of that, but I think I still succeeded at 20, and I will stop and be happy to let the board have conversation amongst itself, or happy to respond to questions and provide feedback at your pleasure.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark. I appreciate the presentation. I also note that Director Lewis is with us. Director Geisinger is with us. I don't know if Director Rosenthal is here. Paul, are you here? I don't see you. Okay. In any event, okay, so I see some, so I want to open this up for questions and comments, not just limited to this presentation, but if anybody has any thoughts they want to bring forward with regard to the June 5th strategic planning session, I'd like you to do that as well too. And I see Director Lewis is first up. Go ahead, Director Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few clarifying questions, if that's all right with you, Mark. On packet page 4, well, it might not be 4, but it's titled Achieving a Balance, Objective versus Subjective, General Feedback and Open-Ended Questions. And that last column, were you referencing, I guess I didn't understand the who in this. The board would provide feedback, the community would provide feedback, or the CEO in this general feedback and open-ended questions?
Yeah, great question. Thanks for the opportunity to clarify.
Sure.
So, Amanda, could you take us to the outcomes slide if you would? And I just need it for 30 seconds to kind of set the stage for this. And then I'll respond specifically to the question. Beautiful. Thank you so much. So Director, thanks for the question. So in regards to the first column of which I was speaking, sort of that objective fact-based outcomes process, you can see here that some of that is tied specifically to community value. That would be one of the outcomes. There'll be an objective fact in regards to how the community sees value from the leadership of your CEO. The customer has a voice through the Net Promoter Score. So the customer's voice will be brought to bear. And then finally, the employee Net Promoter Score, the workforce's voice will be brought to the table in regards to that objective column. Amanda, you can take us full screen now. So to answer your question specifically, the second column, the subjective values-based response, comes specifically from the board based upon your being able to understand from the objective results, the community's voice, the customer's voice, and the employee's voice. You as a director will be informed by those facts as you think about providing as a board member and a director that subjective column, and then the third column, the feedback column for the CEO to reflect on. It was a great question. Did I hopefully answer it as well as you formed the question?
Yeah, no, you did a great job. Thank you so much. That helps. And I just have one more question. It's not packet page 11, which it may not be because I'm so sorry. It says performance evaluation tool review, and I was just curious as to, for example, it says here safety. The CEO has made the safety of our passengers, our employees, and the general public her top priority. You give her some, if you agree or disagree with that, or somewhere in between. And there would be an opportunity to provide an actual comment. So if you disagreed or if you agreed, I can expound on why I might have given that metric, provided her with that metric.
Absolutely. So for each of the three columns, even the fact-based side, which is objective in nature. So let me just give an example. So let's assume that the committee and the board ultimately aligned around an outcome of customer experience, the Net Promoter Score. And the answer is the answer, right? So there'll be a fact-based answer to that. The board will still be invited to provide your thoughts and feedback in regards to customer experience. You will absolutely be invited to provide feedback. The same in regards to the values side. So you will score, if you will, in regards to each of those values that we presented to you. And then you'll provide your thinking behind that. You'll be able to provide your thoughts beyond simply filling out the little bubble. And then the last column, which is the reflective questions comment, those are all simply you providing your thoughts. There are no little bubbles to populate or anything of the sort. It's actually your words providing reflective feedback to the CEO.
Okay, and then final question. The board and step 2, the board evaluation of the CEO, and that third column, it says general feedback and open-ended questions. That is, the board would be sharing feedback of the reflective questions that the general manager has first reflected on. Is that correct?
The way I would describe that is we want to make sure that the board is informed by how the CEO sees that.
Okay.
And so you may see it from a completely different perspective. And I will share with you, Director Lewis, there are some, and I see this quite frequently, there are a number of CEOs that when they do their self-evaluation, they might grade themselves a little more harshly than some board members will.
True.
And there are some CEOs that grade themselves a little more modestly, than they might. And there are directors who may, weigh in, in a different way than the CEO may see themselves. But the key there is you're simply informed by the way the CEO sees this. You are free to provide your thoughts, which may be positively or negatively divergent from the way the CEO sees themselves.
Okay, I promise, Mark, this is my final question. So the CEO would first give her reflections. Have you seen in your experience where, because we're first reviewing the reflections of the CEO, that maybe our what we would have said or is different than what we've said because we've already read the CEO's self-reflection? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Yeah, I think I'm following your question. And the answer is maybe. So, I think sometimes because the CEO does live in the organization, right? And, works there, 250 hours a month. That's her profession. That's what she does. She's going to maybe provide in her self-reflective process perhaps some things that you as a director hadn't thought of when you were thinking of that particular value, and you may see it in a different light once you've read her self-reflective comments. There are other directors who have really thought this through and have reflected on the topic and appreciate the way the CEO views that particular issue, but they view it through a different lens. And that's why it's so critical that we have an objective portion, which is fact-based, a subjective portion, which is people providing their thinking and their views. There really isn't a quote wrong answer, in the subjective portion. It's how people perceive it to be. And so some directors may see it differently based upon the CEO's self-evaluation, and some may not. It really depends on how seriously the CEO takes the self-evaluation process.
Sure. Well, I appreciate this format thus far and what you all have been able to design. I have a great appreciation for it. And I am less nervous. I maybe have less concerns with the subjective and objective pieces of that, because I think it really provides some balance in our approach. And so thank you so much for this work. I may have more questions as the conversation continues, but that's all I have for now.
Great. Thank you, Director Lewis. Director Deschelle, you're next.
Thank you so much, Director Busick and Mark. And I apologize, I'm in transit. Can you guys hear me? Yes, sort of.
Yes.
Yep. Can you hear me? Okay. Great. I appreciate the subjective-objective split. I think I would be inclined, especially as we sort of are in a crisis mode, to lean more towards that 65-35. While it is our first year, we have a serious need. And I think having a subjective-objective throughout the agency is important. I don't know that the Net Promoter Score or the objective pieces are truly directly aligned with our ability to evaluate someone on the subjective piece. And there might really be just too much latitude. I think if we were to say, it's the director's responsibility to make sure that customers, stakeholders, and colleagues who are mentioned throughout our values are well fit, or we think that the CEO is meeting their goals. But I think sort of a protection of the CEO and of the board would be to find a way, whether to do some sort of 360 review, have SLP fill out a similar review, so that we have data from our represented employees, from our unrepresented employees, from customers, from stakeholders, of how they think the CEO is adhering to the values as well. Just because the current objective metrics, I don't know if they really meet those same needs.
I think it's a good point that you raise. I think as we go further into the process, it is certainly easily designable to bring those voices to the table, and to the discussion of the KPIs that might live within the dashboard to produce the outcomes which the CEO would be evaluated on. I think the topics that you're raising in regards to the organizational values are exactly the kind of thing we could think about more deeply as to whether some of those should be KPIs in the performance scorecard.
Thanks, Mark. And the other piece I would raise is, especially with the subjective component, while I am typically advocating for us as a board to do fewer things, I would advocate for us to possibly do that subjective feedback quarterly, just because people are subjective as hard as we try, and memory works in a certain way. And if there's a big event that happens before we fill out that review, that will inevitably unduly skew possibly 17 months of work for 1 month of crisis. And Mark, how has that sort of played out in other places?
It's a good question that you raise, and it's why we push so hard to have a board evaluate their CEO with objective-based facts so that the CEO is not subjugated, if you think of the word, is not relegated, probably the better word, to the latest newspaper article or the latest, audit that some agency might, choose to do. And so everybody views it through the latest headline. And so I think the concern you raise is an appropriate one, which is why that outcomes-based component, which is fact-based, is so critical. I think we could think on a more informal way for the board to provide feedback on the subjective side of the conversation to your CEO. I do think you would want to not make that binding in nature. It would simply be more, informal. And I think we could think about, the structure to deliver that. I will say to the question, which I think is what you ultimately asked, we've not seen that done before. So this is typically an annual process. We're simply recommending 18 months because of your new CEO starting and to get us onto the calendar year as we go forward. But it is typically annual, and we've not seen it done quarterly. That being said, I think we could reasonably figure out an informal way to create sort of snapshot feedback to your CEO on the values.
Yeah, I think even the informal would be great, even, for our own sake, right? Sometimes I engage in reflective processes, and I'm shocked at what I wrote 2 quarters ago, last month, 2 months ago. So I would definitely advocate, even if it is informal, for us to have some sort of way to more regularly reflect on this 50%, and at each person being 6.5%, 6.7%. That's a lot to be that subjective without other benchmarks and milestones.
Thanks, Director Deschelle. Does that conclude your comments?
It does. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you. And I agree with what you said. I hope you bring these back up on the 26th as well. Thanks. Because we do 3 things that are critically important. We set the strategic goals of the agency, we hire a general manager, and we evaluate a general manager. Those are our 3 biggest tasks as directors. So this is what we're doing here, and it's really important that we get it right. So anyway, Chair Rivera-Malpiatti, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark, you had mentioned something about a third party. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what is that and who is that? And how does it fit in?
Yeah, it's a good question. And for a number of our clients that we work with on the strategic planning and the CEO performance review process, larger organizations, mid-sized organizations, and the like, we will do that on the board's behalf, function as that third party. And the way I would describe it, Madam Chair, is that it's not unlike your financial auditor who goes through the books of, that the CFO reports to you on a monthly and a quarterly basis. It's an objective third party on behalf of the board that verifies, are the outcomes that the CEO is being evaluated on being achieved? Is there truth behind them? And so we've seen it done by accounting firms, in some cases. As I said, we've done it in other cases, but it's, I think, particularly when you're tying compensation to this, as well as the CEO's performance, I think, as several of the voices have suggested already, making certain that there is an objective third party beyond the voice of management, ensuring that those results have been produced, is critically important.
So you see it as an outside entity?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
I should say that's best practice. We certainly see clients that self-report. You can do that. As one who serves on several boards myself, I always insist on having a third party verify the CEO and the presidents for the boards that I sit on.
Madam Chair, does that conclude your questions and comments for now?
It does, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Director Cook, you're next.
Okay. Okay, I got to rehearse what I said there. I first wanted to quickly piggyback on something that Chair Rivera-Malpiedi had said. And just to ask, are you the third party that you referenced? Because you had mentioned in a breakout session that you have been separately engaged to develop part of the index. So is the third party you're talking about here Transpo?
No, there's
Okay.
been no conversation on any of that.
Okay, good. Let's see, a couple quick questions. On the aggregating, this had come up previously at different GM. Is the aggregated review approved by the GMOC? That's the first question. The review that the chair provides to the GM, is that approved in its final form for presentation to the GM?
I don't know that I've ever been asked that question. So I guess I would defer to how the board wants to design the process. But typically, there is an aggregated report of the board's themes and responses that is aggregated into one voice that is provided to the board, and the CEO, and the chair presents to the CEO.
Okay, so to the extent we haven't decided that yet, I'll just say that it would be my preference that the GMOC do approve that. And then kind of along the same lines, are all of the individual subjective reviews, if not the objective parts, reflected as well as that aggregated one in how you're laying this out? Does the GM get to see the individual comments and or reviews from all the board members participating?
We would not advise that. It is typically the aggregated report of the board, which goes to the chair to present to the CEO. Okay.
Would just reinforce then the need, in my view, for the GMOC to approve what is reflected to the general manager. No hit against our current chair at all, or any chair, but just thinking that better thinking with many hands in that mix. Okay, the next thing is, I agree with Director Deschelle's point, and I think previously Director Sloan had brought up the idea of a kind of midterm review, a 6-month review. And for the reasons that Director Deschelle cited, I think that's a good idea. Not only do you want to avoid that, that availability heuristic where whatever happened most recently kind of looms large, but to go the other direction too, to make sure that if things are going awry, that there's regular touching base with the GM to avoid that, hopefully, so that she gets more timely. Maybe it could be every 6 months if every quarter is too little, but I just wanted to add support for that piece. On the ridership, so you had mentioned that can be prioritized, and how are the targets that relate to that set? Are they suggested? Are they suggested by the board, by the GM? Are they, who comes up with the specific weighting and targeting on that? You'd indicated a little bit about that, but I wanted to ask more.
Sure. So, I think I had suggested to the board on Saturday that by definition, all authority on all topics sits with the board. And so if the board wants to impose prioritization, and if the board wants to impose goals, and if the board wants to impose the structure, all of that authority lives with the board. In a high functioning organization, that is typically led by the management team, and the goals are set by the management team and recommended to the board. The outcomes are prioritized by the management team and recommended to the board. The KPIs are recommended by the management team to the board for consideration. And then there's a dialogue that takes place. And that is how you land on the outcomes of the organization and the KPIs by which you will measure whether or not the management team is positioning the organization to produce those outcomes.
Okay, thanks. And then just one last on that ridership. If you recall, the dots reflected a prioritization of that, not just within the customer excellence category, but overall, when we went ahead and had the colored dots, that one was topmost. If to the extent it is one of several metrics, even if it's prioritized, a worry I have is that the way that's perceived is that it's not supporting regional goals, community goals. And I'd like us to be an agency. I mean, I guess if I could add a value, it would be that we'd be an agency that supports regional and community goals. And the ridership metric and goal for whatever its technical problems, at least reflected that, because we've got the accountability committee and we've got the legislature and the media, all who focus on this, on ridership and the great hit we've taken, and wanting us to work toward recovering to the extent we can the people we've lost, at least. So I think I am kind of ruing the fact that we do not have it as prominently placed as a success outcome. But if we can't do that, at least making sure that we report it, that we focus on a target that is in keeping with what the region wants us to do and what we should be doing to accomplish things like climate goals and so forth. So anyway, those are all of my questions and comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Cook. Director Bouquet, I think you're up next.
Thank you very much. I did notice CEO GM Johnson raised her hand. I don't know if she would want to respond directly prior to me speaking.
No, I
Okay.
just want to ensure, Mr. Chair, I just want to ensure that I have a conversation recognizing that I'm a vital point, a part of this discussion. And I just wanted to ensure that I'd have an opportunity to speak after all the directors spoke. So thank you very kindly.
Absolutely. We'll put you in the queue there. Director Bouquet, go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you. Just a couple questions, Mark. And the first one is, it's going to be a lot based off of slide 11. Our organizational scorecard, is this the finalized organizational scorecard? Or just an example?
Yeah, simply an example. So
Okay.
we're building that with management as we speak. But it is important to note that the scorecard can't be finalized until we've aligned upon the outcomes that we want to produce, right? We measure what will allow us to be successful. So we have to establish what success looks like to be able to know what should we measure and how should we prioritize it.
Okay, so it is still a living document. Okay. Yeah, so that was just going to be kind of my question regarding, so I'm looking at the information system column regarding community survey versus performance data. And I'm just out of curiosity, and this might be, well, was it your team, Mark, that was developing the metrics, or is this from senior leadership?
I would say yes. So,
Okay.
We work with them in a collaborative way to establish that. And I think, again, to the point, if we land on what the community values in an objective, statistically valid way, then that will drive the KPIs that we would ultimately structure.
Okay. So if you wouldn't mind me asking, just kind of based on what we're seeing originally, I know it is a working document. Could I just kind of have an answer regarding why maybe survey information, either customer survey, community survey, employee survey, I see that as a lot of the lists of the information system compared to performance data. Can I just kind of have an answer regarding maybe why survey was, I see this in a lot of the columns and I only see a couple of them regarding performance data. Just for the record, if you could just kind of explain why there's a lot of survey data, and is that just based on the methodology that we're going to go with, where we're going to be doing a lot of surveying, we're going to be collecting a lot of information, and there just might not be that much performance data? Or was it that we are kind of shifting more, we want to know from the survey data compared to that of performance data? If that kind of makes sense. I can clarify it too.
No, I totally understand your question, and it's a good question. So in regards to thinking about ourselves as a service-based business, right? We are in the business of delivering a service. We provide transportation to people. That's what we do. What we work to establish and what the management team is proposing to the board for consideration is that the outcome which we care about is more satisfied customers. That's what we care about. Now, to the point of some of the directors' questions, we'd also like to have more of them. But we do want to make sure that we serve great coffee so that more people will come to our coffee shop. And so the outcome we're recommending is better coffee. That comes from three factors. The first, the only person who can decide if they're satisfied or not is the customer. They're the voice that needs to be brought to bear in a statistically valid, objective way. So not in an episodic way based upon the 4 or 5 people that might call or write a letter or do what they do. So what you will ultimately see, Director, to your question, is in the customer space specifically, but the example will be the same for others, is the customer gets to pick and prioritize the 5 or 6, 7 elements of their experience that will cause them to be more satisfied. And then we will compare the agency's actual operating performance against the way the customer prioritizes those compared to the customer's impression of those very same metrics. So for example, and I'll stop after this, let's assume that your customer prioritizes on-time performance as the most important element to drive their satisfaction level. You will see a KPI which suggests actual on-time performance and the customer's impression of on-time performance, because both drive the Net Promoter Score, which is the ultimate outcome by which your CEO would be evaluated.
Okay, perfect. And just as kind of a follow-up question behind that, would we as a board kind of see what the analytics or the process is to developing these surveys? So I mean, it's brought up a lot of points I've heard. It's like we survey our customers, but not necessarily our potential customers, or not necessarily people who wrote our TD and decided not to come back, and they might not have had a chance to ever be surveyed. And then just last point off that, you mentioned, basically, if we get complaints, are those complaints kind of factored into the overall surveys as well? When you said kind of episodic, that's what I kind of interpreted that as, hey, if we, we're doing really well with the surveys, and this might be a little bit lost in the weeds and we might be going a little ahead of ourselves. Just under clarification, we will have a breakdown of all the surveys and how that's processed. Okay.
It is. I would just invite, you as a board to really think about how do you manage as a board against the outcomes which you want to see produced, and empower your CEO and her management team to design the execution of that. And so it becomes problematic, having watched this, when a board wants to get involved, well, you didn't phrase question 7, the right way. And if you had done it this way, it would have been. And so really thinking about how does the board ensure that the CEO is producing the outcomes which you care about. Hence to the point that I was asked earlier with the director, that's where that third party, regardless of who you engage to do it, is so critical to make sure that the facts truly are the facts.
Sure. All right. Appreciate it. And then final question, I swear. And then this, what we've laid out as our 4 main outcomes, and how we've ranked our 4 main outcomes. Just to clarify, this is to December 31st, 2022. And then after that, is it okay? It's a whole new process.
Well, a whole new process.
Or a whole potentially new outcomes.
Totally. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. So once you have defined, we're recommending 18 months because, we're trying to build the structure. With
Sure.
Structure isn't in place, you have a new CEO. So our recommendation for your consideration is this first cycle would be 18 months where we build the structure to be performance driven rather than to respond, kind of to latest and loudest. So it's to get this structure stood up so that the CEO has absolute clarity by which the outcomes by which she'll be evaluated. And then we would get ourselves, meaning the board, onto a 12-month process going forward. And absolutely, I expect you'll establish new outcomes at that point, because we're going to have tons more data to inform us as to what those outcomes should be.
Perfect. Just kind of need that for the record. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Director Bouquet, for those questions and comments. Director Catlin, you're up next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A couple of things that I wanted to comment on. One, Mark, you were talking about just getting this structure in place. And this is quite a departure from what we've seen in the past. So I think I speak for myself, but it's going to take some getting used to. And I think we need some time to kind of think through some of this stuff and distill it. And so I really do appreciate the fact that we are starting out, and then we will have good data as we proceed through the next 18 months. The other comment, I mean, it's a little tough because we haven't seen this kind of structure before, and I do appreciate that we are putting some real definite.
Director Catlin, you're kind of difficult to hear.
You're cutting in and out, Peggy.
I'm sorry, I just had IT work on my tablet. Is this a little better? A little. Huh. Well, I spent 3 hours on this today in hopes that I would have some improvements. If you can hear me now, I'll try and get as close as I can to the device. Can you hear me?
You kind of cut in and out. We can hear you occasionally.
Well, rather than getting so close to this device that I'm eating it, I'm going to do my best here. But I really appreciate the structure and moving toward a more performance-based approach. And I agree with Director Deschel that we may want to weight a little more heavily the objective against the subjective. But the other thing I wanted to mention with regard to interim feedback or interim results, we as a GMOC have an opportunity to provide that on a monthly basis. And I think that we should take the opportunity to have that ongoing dialogue with our GM CEO on a monthly basis as we meet as a GMOC. That's all I have.
Thanks, Director Catlin. Appreciate it. Let's see. I'm going to go to Director Geisinger. She hasn't spoken yet. Director Geisinger, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thanks, Mark. This was a really helpful addition to what we did Saturday to sort of see where it goes. I'm wondering about the surveys and a couple questions. You know, if there's sort of standard parameters of the survey or descriptors of the surveys that, you know, in terms of numbers of people and margin of error and how you control those things. Are you, I assume you're measuring two different groups when you go back out to measure the second time. So if you could describe those to me, I guess that's the first question.
Sure. So, you know, we specifically happen to measure customer satisfaction for a number of agencies nationally. There are other folks, you know, who do it as well. The process that we use, you know, I could go into great detail. I'm not going to make a customer satisfaction presentation, but essentially, statistically valid to a factor of within 5%. We approach the customer rather than the customer approaching us. So it's critical that we avoid the episodic where people that are more likely to be promoters or more likely to be detractors, you know, we're approaching the customer. We approach real customers. So we're actually talking to people that are on board, have walked into our coffee shop, if you will, and have purchased a cup of our coffee. So we talk to real folks to ensure that we do it in a statistically valid way based upon route, based upon day parts, based upon weekend use, et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying to think what else that you asked me. So all of that is put into bear. It's certainly conceivable based upon a customer base that we might talk to the same person a second or a third or a fourth time. But the odds of that would be pretty remote.
Okay, thanks. And then with respect to the community value, you're also doing a general community survey, non-writers or investors as a term that I think was used that I like. And, you know, I think I expressed a little bit of this in the small group that I have some concern in such a big district that you're going to talk to people who really don't know, maybe don't care, or maybe even are being swayed by the latest press reports. Do you just have to accept that and hope that, I guess, just what are your thoughts on that?
So I think your concern is an appropriate one, but it will give us a statistically valid sense of not simply the people that you as directors and represent might hear from, but the voice of people whom you don't hear from. And, to your point of investors, right? The folks that are contributing and the things that are important to them. They may not be in touch with you as a board member, but these are the factors that are important to them and the way that they think about it. I would point out, and I think I said this on Saturday to the board, but I'll repeat, we would not recommend to this board or any other, or your management team, that you make policy decisions based upon one piece of data. So we're going to establish what the community values in a statistically valid way. We're going to establish what your customer values in a statistically valid way. But that's going to give us one snapshot in time. And we should want to have at least 2 and perhaps even 3 pieces of insight to be able to see clearly this is where people's heads are. Clearly this is what people prioritize. You don't hear the same thing 3 times and not need to be sort of hit, with a hammer that that's what the truth is. So we will take the first piece of data and consider it to be insightful. Once we have a second and then a third, that clearly is telling us something.
Okay, thank you. We lose our chair.
I think so.
He was coming in and out. He was texting me the other night that he was coming in and out. So,
Marjorie, your time to shine.
oh, you're muted.
You're muted, Marjorie. Still muted. Okay. I had lost control of my screen too. There's something in the atmosphere today. And I was not keeping up with the, the pace of the hands up. So Chair Rivera Malpiedi, I will call on you next. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So I want to address this directly to Second Vice Chair Cook about the process. And Shelley, as you know, when we first got on the board and we did the evaluation of the general manager, as I recall it, the entire board did the evaluation, and then it was the GMOC who got the information. And then I believe the chair met with the general manager, and then the general manager was able to respond and come back to the GMOC for a final evaluation. And I'd like to ask Ms. McManus if that's correct, or if I'm forgetting something, but I'm thinking that's exactly what would happen this time as well.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that that people understand that this is a collaborative and communicative process. It's not just one person talking to one person. It is the collective of the entire 15-member board of directors. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Is the person who called in with the last 2 digits of 68 our chair?
It is, Madam Vice Chair, and you're doing a wonderful job. I can't see anything. I can't see anything. So if you want to continue, I'll just want to make some comments and have some questions whenever my turn can come. Thanks.
Great. And there are a few hands up. Director Lewis, if you don't mind, I am going to call on Director Cook. So I believe she has a response about that last issue.
Yeah.
Director Cook?
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. And yes, that I recall was similar. That was what I think did happen. To the extent that what's reflected in that one-on-one meeting is subjective, I just thought it would add a little bit of a, I don't know, more robust presentation that would reflect what the GMOC had said, yes, that's exactly what needs to be reflected. It would pull in sort of the collective view of the important points. And it would, in my view, be fair to the chair as well. So if I recall, we had concerns about that particular piece, but I would let other people weigh in on it as well. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much for that second bite.
Thank you. And Director Lewis, you're on.
I actually had a process question, so I will let Director Busick go, and it might be able to get straightened, and then we can come back to me if it doesn't get answered.
Sounds good. But first, we'll check with Chair Rivera Malfietti. Did you have your hand up again? Yes.
No, yes, I forgot to take it down. I'm sorry, Madam Vice Chair. I've taken it. Oh, hold on. There it goes. Sorry.
Okay. Chair Busick, you're on.
Thanks, Madam Vice Chair. And I'm also trying to connect to Zoom while I'm doing this. So if I come in, I'll go to the Zoom. But anyway, I live in a transit desert and also an internet desert, apparently. So my apologies for dropping off like that. So I had a question, and my general understanding, and I apologize for having had to have missed the planning session, and I thank Mark for having his staff reach out to me to offer to speak to me about it. I've just been super busy this week and haven't had that opportunity. But my understanding is that the evaluation criteria are kind of threefold. We've got the objective, the subjective, and then the self-evaluation and board feedback. Is that right, Mark, in a general sense?
Yes, sir. Spot on.
Okay. And what I see is that the success outcomes, the objective side, is heavily based in surveys of either community, customers, employees. Is that accurate?
What I would say to that is, in regards to the answer that I gave to Director Bouquet, is that what we advise for a service organization like yourselves is that each of those various elements, whether it's the workforce, the community, or the customer, they're empowered to select which elements of their experience they prioritize. How does the community think about RTD? How does the customer think about RTD? What does the workforce think in regards to recommending RTD? And then we compare the stakeholders' impression with the agency's actual performance. So do surveys matter? Absolutely, because as a service business, what these various stakeholders believe is critical. At the same time, that is balanced with the agency's actual performance against those elements which are prioritized by those stakeholders.
All right, I believe that was a very satisfactory response to Director Busick's question because he's muted. Now CEO GM Johnson's opportunity to make the comments she wishes. And after that, I hope we can get back with Chair Busick and he can bring this all home. So, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Sloan. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I want to thank each and every one of you for being so engaged in this discussion. There's a couple of elements that I want to ensure that I share, recognizing I've been sitting here and it's like I've been a fly on the wall listening to all of this. Some gentle reminders as we go forward, as we look to garner a true partnership in reference to steering the ship in the right direction. Recognizing there are a couple of things that I want to bring forward as we work in a congenial way to come together with how I will be evaluated as your general manager and CEO. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us to recognize that we need to agree upon what the process is relative to you all sharing that with me. Recognizing there are questions by Director Cook and Madam Chair, qualified what was done previously. That is yet to be shared with me. So I'd be remiss in not stating that if we're going to have the rules of engagement, I have to ensure that I come suited and ready to play, and I'm in a basketball uniform and not a football uniform. So that's imperative. So I wanted to put that forward as you guys deliberate and we come to some understanding about how that will transpire. Because if I had done in the course of my career, when I provide earnest and honest feedback with my employees so I can motivate and encourage them to do their ultimate best, there's an understanding about managing those expectations. There was another comment I believe Director Cook made as related to values. And one thing's for certain, when we talk about values, those are the ideals and beliefs that we hold to be true. And that's the spirit in which one does their job to the best of his or her ability, or how we lead ourselves as being representatives of the organization. So when we talk about values, I want to just ensure that we recognize that that's the spirit in which that we as employees, for all intents or purposes, are doing things for the betterment of the organization and the communities that we're serving. And also, I do want to acknowledge that I know that this is a new process for this board, and I know change is hard. And as you've heard me say before, you literally and figuratively can't spell the word challenge without the word change. Because I know before, and I've heard from some of you, there was a Survey Monkey that was used, and there are all these different tools. Recognizing when I came into this space and we were negotiating when I was negotiating with the GMOC, I specifically ensured that this was placed in my contract, because I have seen some things go awry relative to people not understanding where it is. So I just wanted to put that all out there as we come to some understanding about what our path forward is, because this is very important to me as I take on leading this organization. And one thing's for certain, I've had conversation with some of you all. There's a lot of things that aren't apparent to you all as directors that I have uncovered as I've been trying to navigate this terrain. And earlier I equated it with being in a quarry, because every time I turn over a rock, there's another rock and there's another rock and another rock. And those are the elements I believe that Mark Ash was speaking to, recognizing when you do reflect upon things, I most definitely will have another perspective, because I'm doing things from the vantage point of ensuring that this is the optimal organization it ultimately can, and mitigating different factors, which may not even come your way because of that. So open to a myriad of different ways, but want to ensure that it's being done in a fair and equitable fashion as we go forward. And I think we need to make decisions relative to where we are going to be. I don't disagree with what's been posed, that there should be some feedback that I receive. And thank you very much, Director Catlin, for pointing that out, because that should be on an ongoing basis. Because if we were get to a certain point in time in December 22, and I had no understanding of where I stood with you all in reference to my performance, then all of us has fallen down on the job. So just wanted to put those thoughts out there as we've had all this dialogue about whether or not they're activity-based outcomes, whether or not ridership is paramount. Trust and believe in my space of the transit professional in these 29 years. Of course, that is a vital metric, but quite naturally also that's what's been espoused here in this organization. And when you look around globally, we will clearly see if ridership was the only metric that one utilized in 2020, then we all abysmally failed across the globe. And we are failing right now in 2021. So there's a myriad of different efforts that we have to put forward. And as I share, I'll be very transparent. Director Geisinger and I had a discussion, and I said we need to be focused on a ridership growth action plan. That's what's paramount. It's about partnerships as we look at engaging with different entities. All of these things come into play. So those are just the comments that I just wanted to share with you all. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I appreciate it. And I look forward to us coming to a collaborative, working collaboratively to come with an approach that we all feel is in the best interest of the greater community that we serve. So thank you very much for the opportunity to voice my thoughts.
Thank you, CEO Johnson. And I see our chair is back in his chair, but before I turn it over, I have to look at your quarry analogy, CEO Johnson. Anyone who's ever gardened in the Denver area would just say, welcome to the Rocky Mountains, because whenever you put a shovel in the dirt, that's what you get, is one rock after another. So you're with our reality, and we really appreciate having you here. Director Busick,
it's now your control again.
Thanks. And I wasn't done. For some reason, the system muted my phone. I'm surprised you didn't hear me screaming at my phone. I'm not done. Anyway. So let me go back to where I was. I was touching on this survey thing, Mark, and so I understand that there's a component of surveying that happens as part of the objective criteria. And my question really is that that's just for us to use as a tool, I presume, and is not an element of Ms. Johnson's evaluation. She's not being evaluated by the community. I hope not. I'm sure she hopes not too. So, I mean, am I right or wrong on that?
So I want to maybe confront this head on, because I've heard from several directors about all we're going to do is survey people, and that's going to be, the answer of the organization. And I would disabuse, that as a hypothesis that any director might have. And I'll go back to the point that I made in regards to customers, which the agency simply driving all of your vehicles on time does not necessarily result in more satisfied customers. Being on time 100% of the time is not the objective. Having more customers that are happy using the service and value it is the objective. And so the only way the agency knows how to prioritize which elements of our service matter is to bring that voice of the customer to bear. Not the 4 or 5 customers who might call you as directors, not the 3 customers who might get quoted in a newspaper article, but a statistically valid sample of what most customers actually value as the key elements of service. And then we balance how the agency truly does, the value we truly deliver against the customer's impression of that. So to your question specifically, we're suggesting that the outcome of customer excellence is an improved net promoter score. The customer says on a scale of 1 to 10, they think RTD is great and they would recommend that their friends and family take it. So yes, that is an objective, fact-based outcome of customer excellence that will be based upon customer opinion of customers' impression of how well the agency does at delivering operational excellence on the things that they prioritize.
Oh, okay, so I'm either not understanding the answer or I didn't ask a good question. 50% objective, 50% subjective, and then we have this self-evaluation stuff. So we do this survey work, statistically valid, whatever you say. That is the results of that survey from baseline to wherever it goes from there is 50% of Ms. Johnson's evaluation, good or bad, right? Am I getting that right?
So there are 4 factors that would go into her objective evaluation. One's related to community, one is related to financial management, one is in regards to the workforce, and one is in regards to customers. There will be objective, fact-based results for each of those 4 factors, which would be 50% of the CEO's performance review. In the values column, which is subjective, there are 6 values of the organization: passion and diversity. I can't repeat them off the top of my head, but you saw the slide. There are 6 of those factors that are in play. And then there are a series, I think 5 or 6 questions that are reflective in nature. Those would not formally go into her, quote, evaluation, but would be a key part of how she thinks about her performance for going forward.
So the short answer to the question I asked is yes. So I think I get it. I'm worried for Ms. Johnson that 50% of her evaluation score can be based on survey results from all 4 factors, whatever they are. Because as Director Deschelle pointed out, I mean, there could be something that happens that, she could be on this rocket ship trajectory to doing great things, and then some dramatic event occurs, and RTD is, you know, the worst thing in the world in people's minds. And here's your evaluation, Ms. Johnson. They hate RTD. So I don't know. Ms. Johnson, are you okay with that kind of a possibility?
I think there's a myriad of things that we have to take in consideration going forward, because I do agree we're a service-based organization. And that's why when I made my comments that I did, that everything is not garnered toward ridership, it's what we're doing holistically. And basically, there needs to be an aspect of the community to discern what we're doing collectively, so then we can change our approaches to ensure that we are delivering customer excellence. Now, in reference to how we divvy that up, I am open to having discussions, because right now, I'll be honest, as I was saying before, using my quarry analogy, that there are a lot of things that I have discovered within this organization, and it's whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, and this is not intended to disparage anybody that came before me, because I know there will be successors. The point of the matter is that there's a lot to do to fix, and I am one person. So as we do this collectively, we need to be engaged in such a way where it is holistic. And if anything, looking at what I said I would do when I came into this organization. So whether or not we're engaging, we're communicating, I can put forward my best effort, but there's a way in which we can balance that going forward. Because I do believe, being a person in the people business, that I have to hear from the customers to have an understanding of what their experiences are. That gets back to being empathetic and understanding pain points. So there is an ultimate role in all of that. But on the flip side of it, as Mark was saying, there's other elements as well. So that's where I stand in all of this.
Okay, I get that. Thanks for your input, and I appreciate that. But I guess, and maybe it's me, you know, the change thing, right? I mean, maybe it's the change thing. But, you know, you talk about statistically valid surveys, and ask Hillary Clinton about that. I mean, I just don't know. I guess we'll see how that happens moving forward and how that works. But
so, Director Busick, if I may, so what is your recommendation?
Well, my recommendation would be that a smaller percentage of your score be attributed to outcomes measured by the general population. So, you know, the general this happens all the time. You know, we as directors know so much more about what's going on at RTD than the general population. And it's easy for someone on the outside to say, oh, you should do this, this, and this, and not knowing that we've looked at this, this, and this a million different times in a million different ways. So they're not as informed as directors are. Sometimes they react to items or matters that are not necessarily relevant to what's going on. So there's just so many variables, I think, that it concerns me. So I would prefer some kind of a lower percentage of your evaluation being attributed to that metric.
So if I could ask Mark, perhaps you can go back to the slide with the objective evaluation criteria, so we can just walk that through, so we garner an understanding from everybody that's assembled. I think that would be helpful.
I appreciate that, Madam CEO, because I wanted to go to that slide as well. So let me tick down them, because I do want to be clear in regards to the survey question. So let's start with the understanding that we are in the service business. And so the reality is, when it comes to customer experience, the opinion of whether or not we are working on the right things to enhance the customer experience is the only metric to determine customer satisfaction. So in regards to customer excellence, the outcome is 100%, Mr. Chair, to your point, is 100% driven by the customer's opinion. People that have walked into our coffee shop and purchased our coffee, do they like it? So that is absolutely the case. In regards to the financial outcome, there is no opinion associated with that. There is no survey. There is no subjectivity to it. There'll be an answer, and it will be done by math, and there's no survey of anyone. It simply is a fact. The third would be in regards to the workforce. would our workforce recommend RTD as a place to work to their friends or a family member? Is that a survey? Absolutely. It's a survey of the people that work here. And are we creating a culture which they find valuable? So the CEO is suggesting that she's committed to creating a performance-based culture around these 6 values. And would the people who work within the 4 walls of RTD recommend this as a place to their friends and family members? And then finally, the 4th is the community, the people who pay the bills, and they will be empowered to prioritize what they find most valuable about their investment in RTD. And do they believe that they are getting value back based upon those factors that they have said is important to them? It will be incumbent upon the CEO to create a communications strategy and a work program strategy so that community members are able to see both sides of that and see enhanced value. So I want to just,
Mark, if I can ask, if Amanda could put that slide on the screen where we have the criteria, because I know some people are visual in that regard, so maybe that would help. I'm offering that up. I don't know Director of Music. I just want to get some kind of, understanding.
I've got it right in front of me. And Mark,
okay.
to your point, under the financial success, only 50% of it is a technically measurable outcome. The other 50% is, does the community believe it sees value in RTD spending? I would imagine that's got to be from a survey result.
it is. And to your point, we are continuing to have conversation if we've landed on the right outcome there. So you may see some adjustment there. But to your point, well made. If we stay with where we are, that is absolutely 50% of that element would be based upon the impression the community has.
Okay, I guess that concludes my comments for now. I have Director Lewis with a hand raised. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make sure that we are moving the conversation forward. And so a few things come up for me as we're talking about objectivity and subjectivity is, I think a lot of what's really been swirling with RTD has been pretty subjective. And I think we've really swayed in terms of what we do for the general public, for our stakeholders, in ways that responds to the subjectivity, whether if it's honest or not. And so whether if it's perceived or a fact. And so I have a deep appreciation for the subject, or for the objectivity personally. And I guess I'm curious in terms of getting consensus, because I would hate for us to move forward and our CEO isn't in agreement with us as we move forward, or the board isn't in agreement with our CEO as we move forward. Are we close to reaching consensus? Are we interested, or is that going to be a part of the conversation as we move forward? And I see it in two ways: the action steps, which are outlined within our packets, but also in our general agreement with how our CEO would like for us to evaluate her, or how we are evaluating our CEO, and if she's in agreement with in that evaluation process and method. And it sounds like there might be a disconnect here. And so I just wanted to just put that on the table and have a discussion about it so we can move forward.
Thank you, Director Lewis. And I'm not sure if today is that we've got one more session on the 26th, and my guess is that's where we flesh out the remainder of these types of issues, have those discussions, and come to a final product. Does that sound about right?
As long as we stick to the action steps. That's why I asked.
Well, point of clarity as well, and perhaps I think a conversation does need to ensue relative to what it states in my employment contract, relative to agreements that have been made. So I want to put that out there as well, because basically we have this date. It's something that we agreed to, and so you'll know I'm not one to be hamstrung by dates, but we need to ensure that we're having a conversation around that, so that's not lost, especially when we talk about, having discussions with me. And of course, we can have those on an ongoing basis, but managing expectations amongst us all. Because one thing's for certain, and I mean this in all sincerity, I still have an organization to run. And so when we look at activities, I need to manage my team. So that's something I'm still going to be doing. But of course, we need to rally around what those outcomes are, because I, as the general manager, CEO, cannot not be in alignment with you all. So this timeline, as we've sat here, basically, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to agree what the path forward is. Because yes, we're going to have a joint retreat with those that comprise the leadership team, and those are the individuals that report directly with me and have auspices over certain functional units. That's great still, but if we do not have alignment around what our North Star is, and the board as the policy body isn't in sync, then we're at a disadvantage in order for me to do my job in the manner in which I was hired to do my job as specified in that job description that Kroftheimer put forward that made me go after and pursue this opportunity. So thank you.
Sure, and I appreciate you saying that, and that's essentially what I was trying to get to. What I've heard is, you know, in this objective, subjective, and then the evaluation for you, that there's some agreement that it should be 50%. There's some agreement that it should be more, and so getting consensus in that regard. There was a question about process from Director Cook, and so just being solidified in that regard and how we move forward. There was a inquiry from Director Deschelle about how often, in terms of the cadence of the self-evaluation and the board evaluation, in which we would be doing that in between now and December 2022. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were very clear on those things as we were moving forward.
Understood. Thanks for those comments. So what's the consensus of this group? What needs to come out of this meeting today as we move forward? Do we need decisions on the timeline for one? Do we need decisions on the interim evaluation process? I'm looking for some input.
Mr. Chair, I think we need to move forward with the plan to do the June 26th meeting to see what comes out of that before we make any kind of change here. I mean, we're in the middle of a process that I think we really owe it to ourselves to go in and look at, and then decipher from there how we move forward.
Right, and that's kind of what I was thinking, but when I saw that timeline on one of those slides, I thought there was a GMOC recommendation that occurred before the 26th, and I don't know how that happens.
So let me qualify that. Giving you all something to react to, recognizing that this is a new process. I don't believe anybody assembled here has gone through a appraisal development process such as this. I've done it in different organizations. And so what I'm doing here, we need to ensure, working in conjunction with Transpro, recognizing that there needs to be some guidance here, because without that, here we have what's in the employment contract saying that there'll be agreement upon specific criteria that the board will make in consultation with me on June 30th. So if there was nothing here, then how do we get to that end goal? So with that as a backdrop, this could potentially be a special GMOC meeting. But as I said before, with my comments that I imparted upon with all of you, is that I don't even know what the rules of engagement are. So I would ask you all, as my board of directors, to ensure that you're giving me information that is helpful in reference to understanding how I will end up in relationship to getting feedback in order to do the best job that I possibly can. And right now, I'd be remiss to say that I'm at a quandary, because I am sitting here in a state of ambiguity, not recognizing what our path forward is, when we have a mutually agreed upon contract that says we're going to do certain things. And it seems as if we're really not aligned and things are really blurred. And needless to say that I'm extremely frustrated at this juncture, not recognizing what direction we're going. So I would ask somebody to impart upon me what would be the most cohesive strategy going forward, or at least I would ask of you to provide me with a timeline that may be more advantageous for all of you, because I don't want to push the envelope, but I just would ask that my expectations be managed, because that's what I try to do in my leadership capacity with people that I work with. Thank you.
understood, and I share your frustration in that I have no idea what's going on either. I really don't. My understanding was, as I just said, is that we had a two-part process, the June 5th and the June 26th process, out of which would come the final product of goal setting and evaluation. I understand there's this June 30th contract deadline. We changed that once. I'm guessing we can probably change that again if we needed to, but I don't want to kick things down the road too far. But I certainly don't want to rush things to the point that we come up with a product we're not happy with. And based on the content of these conversations and comments, I think we need to wait for the June 26th retreat and the outcomes of that to see where we're at and where we're going. I'm happy to take some more comments on this.
I just have a clarifying question, just looking at the timeline here, Director Busick. It says GMOC recommends to the full board on June 24th, and you're proposing that instead that be the 26th, are you, please clarify, I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, I would, and I didn't make that timeline, so not me. I would think it would have to be after the 26th, when the process is done. The process being the board determining goal setting and evaluation and so forth. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I got this wrong, but
No, I just wanted to clarify.
yeah, no, that's very good.
And Mr. Chairman, I might just point out that this is a whole new process for this board of directors with the new general manager and bringing in a strategist kind of component rather than what we have done in the past. And so I would ask Mark to clarify the timeline on that, because I think it's imperative for us to take a look at that and then to look at our general counsel to see if we need to extend it. How does that work? So that at least we know where we're going with this, because I was under the impression, as you were, Mr. Chairman, that the next meeting would be on the 26th, and then we would go from there and develop all of these components. So Mark, can you shed some light on that timeline again, please?
Madam Chair, if I can just say, I am the one that put that timeline in. So I just want to qualify, as opposed to putting our consultant on the spot, recognizing that we had the 30th and we did do one amendment. I have been here for 7 months. So that was me in consultation with Mark. So I don't want to put him on the spot for that. I own that, right?
Okay.
And so if anything, another clarifying point is that we are having a retreat collectively, as everybody was sort of rallying around the flagpole as it relates to past history, with what's called the senior leadership team meeting with the board. For all intents and purposes, at that retreat, I have to be honest, I don't see the senior leadership team opining on how my performance evaluation will be structured. So those are two separate elements. Hence, that's why we're having this conversation with the GMOC relative to the different components. Does that make sense? I hope I'm clarifying that, and I'll yield the floor to Mr. Ash, but let me be clear in reference to outcomes. That's one thing with the leadership team, because they lead the functional units that basically contribute to the inputs that lead us to the outputs that get us to the outcomes. However, as it relates to the performance evaluation of me as the general manager and CEO, that is incumbent upon you and I to agree upon collectively. So I do not envision that discussion ensuing with members that are subordinate to me relative to how I will be evaluated. Thank you. And Mr. Ash, I will yield the floor to you, but I just wanted to own those steps, since I'm the one that directed you to put them in accordingly. Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, appreciate the question. And while you asked me a process question, I'm going to give you a content answer. And so the content answer that I would give for your consideration and for the committee's consideration is that you hired a new CEO 7 months ago, and 201 continue to espouse the wisdom and the choice that you made, of which I would agree that you should be pleased with the selection that you made. Your CEO has made a recommendation to this committee and to this board the outcomes which she wants to produce for this organization. You've provided her now at least 3, and in some cases 4 elements of feedback, which she has taken into consideration and has presented you with what she thinks the outcomes by which she should be evaluated 18 months from now would be. And so, in my view, Madam Chair, we're beyond the process. We can happily work to determine the process to achieve this, but the content question is the board going to empower the CEO to establish a set of outcomes which she's committed to producing, or will there be continued conversation around this? So I think that's the question in front of the committee.
Thank you. That really helps a lot.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'm going to go to some of the other comments. Director Lewis, did you have any more to add? Your hand's still up.
I'll let others speak and then I will chime in about where I think.
Okay, great. Director Bouquet?
Yeah, so just kind of a comment and maybe like a clarification question afterwards. So once again, everyone shares on this board, I think I can speak for everyone on this board, that we want our CEO and our GM to be successful. And based on the timeline that she has established, I think that's the timeline we should stick with if that's truly believe what our GM and CEO believes would give her the ultimate, success rate. I do understand, the idea of we don't want to rush anything. At the same time, I do have a lot of fear, and this is what I brought up last GMOC meeting, was what if we don't, come to a clear consensus? And that's what I'm worried about is, we're not coming to a clear consensus. If we keep kicking the can down the road, I'm not sure if we're going to be giving enough time for our GM and CEO to have that success. So that would just be my one comment. And just to clarify, and I don't know if this is your answer, Chairman, or someone else's, but from my understanding, please clarify. We as a GMOC say, hey, what we've discussed today, we are good with, and then on the 26th we present to the rest of the board, and then we agree upon as an entire board that yes, this is the success outcomes. This is how we want to measure our GM and CEO. Is that correct? From the
My understanding of that timeline is we make a recommendation to the board on the 24th. So not after the 26th.
But from my understanding, the recommendation would be the 24th, and then it would be a discussion on the 26th. Is that accurate?
I would imagine, yeah.
Okay, so that's what I would just be, my recommendation at this point is, we don't want to kick the can down the line. I think we should stick with the current timeline that we've established. These are goals. That's why I asked till December 22nd, 2022. This isn't the entire timeline of RTD. This isn't the entire future of RTD. And we ultimately want to make sure that our CEO and our GM is successful. And if this is what's been established, that's what I would just kind of carry forth. So I'm in favor of us going forth with the recommendations that we've come with today. I know there's probably some disagreement, and then present that to the board, and then on the 26th, ultimately have a discussion. Sorry, this might be just me thinking out loud, but that's my comments. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks. I appreciate it. Director Cook, you're next.
Thank you. And first, a quick question and then a suggestion. So once you had sort of worked through what each of the 4 outcomes is reflected by, I guess I had thought, based on the presentation, that some of these prioritized strategies and metrics would be part of the pieces that are pulled in for us to evaluate. And if that's not true, at least in the customer area, could it perhaps be true as a way to limit somewhat, to mute or attenuate the large role of surveys? So that's a question. And if we're going to be meeting on the 24th to firm this up, so we have a recommendation going into the second retreat, then that might be one thing we could do is, could we look at something that has some elements beyond just the survey, or at least limiting somewhat the survey component of our evaluation and pulling in some of these limited numbers of prioritized strategies and metrics. So that's a thought.
Thanks, Director Cook. Yeah, I don't know that we can come out of this meeting with a lot, right? We can probably agree upon the objective evaluation criteria, but we don't have the example. You know, all we have are examples of the categories of items that we would be opining on in the subjective side of things, and so maybe that's something that's going to be coming to us in final detail, because I think we need that before we can have a final recommendation. So. Director Lewis, did you have a comment?
Did you want to respond to that, Director or General Manager, before I comment?
Oh, I would say yes, for all intents and purposes, as I shared before. So thank you, Director Lewis, and thank you, Director Busick, for the opportunity to opine on this. I think if anything, yes, it's like, here we have the appraisal, and we can agree conceptually to what it will consist of. And as we talk about the outcomes, that's something we could have conversations around, but for all intents and purposes, to Director Cook's point, there's some activities that are there, and we can have a discussion. If it's your recommendation, what I would ask, if you all put something together, then I could react to, because I have put together something for you all to react to. It's something that you have comments on, but in the absence of having anything to react to, we're just going round and round. So keeping in mind, if you want to evaluate me on activities, I'm not inclined to be evaluated on activities, because basically that's nothing but activities. What are we actually trying to get? So I would ask all of you to consider putting something together from your perspective that you think I, as the general manager and CEO, should be evaluated upon. If what we have presented at this juncture is not palatable for you, I can respect that. But I would ask you, out of respect for me, please give me something that you think would be much more substantial or much more in line with what you would like to see, and then we can have discussions. Because right now, I'm at a loss at what else I can do without having viable feedback or having some clear-cut definitions relative to what it is that I should be doing to satisfy your interest here. So thank you.
Okay, so I apologize, because I'm working at a disadvantage, because the strategic planning session was scheduled in a date that I couldn't attend, even though I'm the chair of the GMOC. So I guess I'm really at a disadvantage in that regard. Nonetheless, I've seen what came out of there, and all I'm saying is that, you know, we've got these objective evaluation criteria. If people are okay with that, that's great. But other slides showed these kind of blurry images of evaluation forms, and I don't want to recommend a blurry image. I mean, I think we need more detail on what that really is. That's all I'm saying there. I think we have someone else to comment. Was there Chair Rivera Malpatty? Do you want to make a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. You know what? I will just say this. On at the workshop on Saturday, as I went through all 4 different groups, there was a recommended outcome. And we were asked if we wanted to change it at each one. And here's what my recollection and my experience was that we didn't know how to do that. We kept going to activities. And the differentiation between governance and management is stuck in my head about what exactly is our role as a board of directors. It's to govern on the big groups. The activities are management components that we all, of course, would be involved with at some level, because we're all community leaders, right? But we hire the staff, we hire the general manager to do the big thinking, and that's what we base this on in terms of goals and objectives for the good of the entire region, the entire agency. So I guess for me, what I would like to say is I really support what Director Bouquet said. This is our new general manager. This is a new time for RTD. She is bringing in a whole new perspective on how we move forward as this agency. And I want to support her in this so that we can move forward and then develop, does this work, does this not work? But boy, we got to give her the ability to be successful in her own right as a leader in this transit agency. That's why we hired her. And quite frankly, I have to say, over the last 7 months, she has knocked it out of the park. And I think we owe it to her to be supportive. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, if I could provide a clarification at your pleasure.
You bet. Go ahead.
Amanda, could you bring up our slides, please? Because I want to sort of tackle this topic for the committee's benefit of vagueness. So there are 3 components by which the CEO's evaluation would be based. The first is the outcomes. So Amanda, if you could take us to that slide that speak to the 4 outcomes. And to the point that a number of committee members are raising about having a quote good day or a bad day, the CEO is signing up, willing to take the risk that opposed to an episodic complaint-based model, she's signing up for saying, I should be able to deliver customer value based on customers' opinions. I'm up for the risk. I'm willing to work on the right things. So she would be evaluated on the clarity of this slide. There's no ambiguity to what the slide looks like. Amanda, could you take us to the values slide, the subjective slide? There are 6 values of the organization. These are the 6: passion, respect, diversity, trustworthiness, collaboration, ownership. There's no vagueness to this. It is absolutely clear the criteria of which the board would express its opinion in providing feedback. Is she delivering against this? Amanda, could you take us to the slide of feedback with the questions that are in place there? The 3rd section of her evaluation would be these 5 questions. There's no vagueness or ambiguity. It's these 5 questions which the board would provide feedback. So I just want to be clear with the committee that the CEO is recommending for your consideration these 3 slides, which have absolute clarity to them. And it's her recommendation that this is what she's evaluated on. Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Could you bring up the performance evaluation tool preview slide?
And I do want to be clear to that it's simply a screenshot of an example. So we would need to build this for you based
right.
on
That's what I was, that's the vagueness piece right there. Okay, to me. The other stuff clear, I get it. And if that's all we need now, and we can develop these as we go, but I guess I kind of like to have a package, you know?
Well,
so do we need to have something come out of, do we need a clear decision today, or are we having a special GMOC on the 24th? What's the plan with that?
Mr. Chair, if
Yes.
I may, I was recommending, based upon this conversation and discussion, that we would have a special GMOC meeting, recognizing this is the first time that we've had this discussion relative to the tool in and of itself, the digital wizard that Mark had just referenced as a screenshot. So that information that he put there for you all to react to would be populated relative to the values that we have here, in reference to the passion, the trustworthiness, diversity, the collaboration, the ownership. So that would be populated. So that can be done by TransPro, so you all can make an informed decision and have that prior to the meeting on June 24th. So we would come to a place where then you can decide if you wanted to take an affirmative action or take something to the contrary, or provide more feedback relative to the direction in which we would go collectively as the board and with me as the general manager CEO. Thank you.
That makes sense. I appreciate that clarification. Thanks. Director Geisinger?
You're muted. Oh, there you go.
My phone started ringing right as I was going to speak. Sorry. I shared some of the concern about the specific performance metrics. If the suggestion is that will come back to us separately, I think that helps moving forward. This is a little tangential, but I think Mark said that you were still working on the financial definition of what the review is. And I would encourage that. I think it seemed like a lot of people, and I was, I was included, that, that you spend less than you make. That's a given in some ways, but it raises issues around service and and things like that. And we have the fiscal policies that were raised. So I'm not going to get into the details of it, except to say that I do think that could use some refinement. I am going to have to sign off. I'm not on the GMOC anyhow, so I'm not a vote here. I think if we're voting on those big metrics, not the metrics, the big, the objective and subjective, that we're getting close. And I think you're right, Vince, that in terms of the performance metrics, and it sounds like those can come later. But thank you, and I need to go.
Thanks, Director Geisinger. Director Lewis, your hand's still up. You want to make some final comments?
Yeah, I never got a chance to make a comment. I wanted.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. It's all good. I allowed somebody to respond. I was just going to agree with Director Bouquet that I was okay with us moving forward with the recommendation as is presented by our general manager. And I'm reflecting back on our evaluations of past general managers. And I think one of the critiques I personally had was that a lot of the things that were being presented were activities. And so I will have to have a deep appreciation in this moment that was a critique and a frustration of mine, and that we are remedying this while also understanding that this is a new process and change is quite difficult and also necessary. And so those are my words, and I'm done and my hands down.
Great, I appreciate it. And yeah, it is. I mean, this is a 180 degree change for us. So General Manager Johnson, please, these questions and comments I think are geared toward fleshing out all the detail and not in any way a critique or criticism of you. It's just we're trying to get through this process. But so 24th of June, 3 p.m. I want everyone to go into their participant section. Oh, Director Bouquet, did you have another comment?
I was going to let you finish your thought and then comment afterwards, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure thing. As soon as you're done, I want everybody that cannot make that meeting raise their hand. But go ahead, Mr. Director Bouquet.
Oh, I think what I'm kind of gathering from my viewpoint was there's a little bit of a frustration. Just I know there are board members that just were a little frustrated with this whole process, and I think just from my analysis, kind of going back to the comment I said a little bit back, we're getting to the point where we're running out of time to, just start all over and say, hey, we have to redo this process. I would just say for the board members that might be frustrated with how, this all laid out, this might be something that we have a future conversation after December 31st, 2022, or before we go through this entire process of evaluation again. That's just kind of my viewpoint of it, is that we are getting to a point where we're kind of running a little bit out of time to reach the objectives of December 31st, 2022. And, maybe that's something we have a discussion later on down the road, so that we don't have as much frustration. That's all I would have to say. Thank you.
Thanks. Chair Rivera-Malpiedi, your hand is up.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm wondering, do we have the entire GMOC committee online currently?
No. We're missing Director Rosenthal.
Okay.
But Director Bouquet is an alternate. So I guess technically we have 7 members of the GMOC.
So I would like to respectfully ask if this committee, members of the GMOC, are in favor of moving forward with the recommendations that the general manager has put forward for her objectives, so that we know where we're going.
I'm willing to nod my head, as that, I guess it's probably not an official vote, but definitely a head nod.
Yeah. So Madam, are we talking about the 4 objective evaluation criteria?
That would be correct. And I guess I would ask our general counsel if that's the correct way to do this or not, to make sure that I'm doing it correctly.
Can we entertain a motion, Melanie, to that in that regard?
We're not taking formal action today, but I think that you should. I do think it would be productive for you to get some consensus about where you are aligned today. So both as to the timeline and then, which pieces of what's been presented today you have some alignment around.
Okay. So what I'm hearing is Chair Rivera-Malpiedi would like to see if there's consensus on approving the objective evaluation criteria as set forth in the slide deck for this meeting, And to that end, why don't we go in and raise your virtual hand if you're okay with that?
Okay.
And if
Oh, my virtual hand.
virtual,
Virtual, real. I'm just. Wait, 1, 2. Wait, it keeps moving. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I see.
Mr. Chair, I had my hand raised to speak prior to your
Oh, I'm sorry.
the virtual hand, but it's okay because I am in support of it.
okay.
So
I just wanted to comment and thank you, Chair Rivera-Malpiedi, for pushing this forward. But I just wanted to say with regard to GM CEO Johnson that I really respect that we had something to react to. And you can't hear me?
No, you're cutting. Okay, why don't you stop your video? That takes up a lot of bandwidth. Maybe that'll help the audio.
Well, it'll also help. Is that okay? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
yeah.
Good suggestion, and it's easier on the eyes if I stop my video. But I just wanted to say I really appreciated GM CEO Johnson and Trespro providing us with a place to start.
Yes.
And something to react to. And I acknowledge her frustration that we haven't come to alignment yet on this. And I really appreciate that we're going forward. And I agree with Chair Rivera-Malpiedi that we were tending to drop into activities on June 5th rather than the overall goals. And I am encouraged that we are embarking on a process that we have not done in the past. And it is a departure, but I think we're moving in the right direction. So I, for one, am supportive of just moving ahead with what has been suggested by Chair Rivera-Malpiedi, and wanted to thank you all for all your hard work in developing this starting point. And we have opportunities, as Director Bouquet suggested, to make course corrections later on. But let's get started and let's get moving on this process so that we can keep our CEO and general manager, that she doesn't leave out of frustration because of this board's inaction. Yeah. Quite frankly, I would worry about that. We just need to give her and empower her to succeed. So I'll get off my soapbox now.
Thanks, Director Catlin. Hang on. Director Lewis, did you have something more?
Since you've called on me, but my hand was up because I was agreeing, but I did wonder what the process might be for us to, with those course corrections that Director Bouquet brought up, where we might be able to insert those as we were preparing for the next process. But we might just be way too many months early for that, but I just wanted to put it in the conversation.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it might be a little early, but we need to keep that at top of our mind. But for now, let's try to get through where we're at now today. Ms. Johnson, did you have some comments?
Yes, I just have a request of you, Mr. Chair, and the committee as a whole, recognizing that we do have these GMOC committees, and I do understand the charter for said committee, but I would like to put forward that as we develop these agendas, if I have an opportunity to add input, because this would enable us to have a more informed discussion as we go forward. And that's what I would offer up. And I say this because recognizing that I did not know until late last week that this committee meeting was taking place, and Transpro had to quickly pivot to make this happen. So I am putting forward that request of the committee to ensure that I have an opportunity, because we could help create and make this a lot more productive if I had an understanding of what your expectations were as we went forward. Thank you for your consideration of that request.
I appreciate that, and definitely you'll be a big part of this. Okay, so back to one of the things I wanted before. Raise your hand if you cannot make the meeting on the 24th. Special GMOC meeting, June 24th, 3 p.m. No hands raised. Okay, let's do that. And I think we've got consensus moving forward out of this meeting that we are all on board with the 4 objective evaluation criteria. When we meet on the 24th, we'll probably talk a little more about that, but talk in more depth about those performance score sheets or whatever you want to call them. So, does that sound right? Anybody?
Yes. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Anybody doesn't agree, don't say so. So, okay. Are there any other matters that we need to discuss today at this meeting?
What is the meaning of life?
We're not going to find it here.
I had to mute myself so you could hear my laughter. That was good.
Okay, thanks everybody for this good discussion. Thanks Mark and Deborah, directors, everybody. It was good discussion, and I really appreciate it. It's it's a change, and change is tough. What's the graph? I always tell you that when you're on a trajectory of happiness or whatever, and then there's change, it drops off, but then it comes back up and it's higher than where you live, and whatever. So we'll get there. Anyway. Having no other matters come before the board, our next meeting is not July 1st. It is June 24th at 3 p.m. And we'll see you, all your smiling faces there. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.